And I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves because I think, they can give the best introduction. What I am going to do, wonderful panelists, is ask you to use no more than 90 seconds with your introduction because I have some really hardcore questions to throw at you today. Okay? Oh, just one more thing before we come to you. I would ask everybody to put your view in the top right-hand corner. You're all Zoom experts by now, I'm sure, but put your view on speaker view. That way you won't be disturbed by anything happening on your screen with somebody else, and you'll be able to focus and zero in on what the speakers have to say. Okay, so we will start the introductions with Chisholm Udeze, the host of these events and the founder of Diversify.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, my name is Chisom Udeze. I am Nigerian. I have spent a better part of my life in the West, so the US primarily, and over the past 10, 11, 12 years in Europe, the Netherlands, the UK, and now Norway. I am an economist, and so I work across the world on sometimes exciting, sometimes boring data-driven projects and passion projects that has now turned into, a growing organization is Diversify, and I'm also the founder of Her Space, which is a co-creation community for women in Oslo and also across the world. I'm really excited to be here today. I know there's so much that I will learn from, Kevin and William and all of you. So I'm really looking forward to this. Just my background on DEI, I am a DEI enthusiast and consultant. So you will see me get passionate today. I can't help it. Yeah, so happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Chisholm. And thank you for, setting up this initiative. It's been very enriching for many of us people across the world who have provided excellent feedback. So thank you, Chisholm. Now I'm going to come to you, Kevin. Could you please introduce yourself?
Certainly. Thank you, Hyacinth. And I'd like to follow on from what Chisholm said with passion. Let's stay on passion. So what am I passionate about? About what I call social sustainability. That's, I'd say that's about helping people to manage stress, anxiety, and to avoid burnout and dropout at home and at work. So that's about taking care of ourselves, of one another, and the planet. And that's really important because I think we're at a unique sort of moment in time now in human evolution, where thousands of years of what I call contemplative science, what all the yogis have been doing, has come together with neuroscience and quantum physics to give us some evolutionary insights. And that's really the opportunity of our age: evolve, reconnect, or go down the Swanee, I think. So my contribution to that is as mind trainer at Mind Lab Oslo, where we work with awareness of work and well-being at work programs to help organizations up there in a game. And if there's one other thing I'd like to say before passing on, that is gratitude, which is one of the superpowers that I recommend for myself and others. So I just want to say thanks to Chisholm and team for this opportunity and for including me. Thank you to Amalia and Luca, my kids, for refocusing me and my life after a serious illness a few years ago. I wouldn't be here today saying this without them helping me to reconnect and redirect my life. So that's my gratitude practice done for today. Thank you.
Wonderful. And we are grateful to have you with us, Kevin. So thanks for joining us today. And, having, panel with men is really wonderful because quite often men don't join in these conversations all too often, and especially not Black men. So welcome, William. Welcome, William. Let's celebrate. Let's give it for the boys. Woo! Welcome, William. Right, you need to unmute and share your... William, could I ask you to unmute, please? There we go.
Thank
Got
you.
so caught up in
Yeah.
the celebrating that forgetting to unmute, huh?
Yes, my name is William Kweku Pinto, and originally from Ghana in West Africa, and I've lived in Germany, Belgium, and now in Norway. Anything culture, everything culture. I'm passionate. I think it's challenging to talk about culture because you end up we end up generalizing about culture, and we forget that we are like a forest. There are individual trees that make up a forest. Some focus on the forest and some focus on the individual trees. So I'm looking forward to this, and I hope to learn from you, and we see how this will unfold. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here, William. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we're just going to do a little bit of a practice now. Did anybody watch Black Panther? If you did, can I see your hands? Yeah, you watched Black Panther. Right. So do you remember when you know, people were getting excited? What did they do when they really heard something or saw something that they loved? They use their shoulders to celebrate, right? They use their shoulders to celebrate, and they so today I'm going to ask you to get involved. Use your shoulders to celebrate when we see you on camera, so that we can know. There we go. Let's practice. Get some shoulder action in there, so we can know. Yes, that was a point that hit the soul. Awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Right, so everybody's geared up and everybody's ready to go. So for the first question, I'm just going to throw it in. I'm going to ask all of you guys, and I'll start with you, Chisholm. So what does a diversity and inclusion mean to you in the context of cross-cultural communication?
Thanks, Hyacinth. So within a context of diversity, cross-cultural and communication, I can't talk today, obviously, but diversity means, to me, acknowledging that each of us are unique and recognizing our individual differences on, you know, a basis of known diversity parameters. So I'm talking about gender, ethnicity, race, ideologies, physical abilities, sexual orientation, political beliefs, and the like. And inclusion within this context means the practice of providing equitable access to resources and opportunities for people, and especially those who might be otherwise excluded on a basis of, you know, factors like culture and ideology or perspectives, like I just mentioned. So to me, inclusion within cross-cultural communication means creating space for involving and valuing people from different cultures, ideologies, and perspectives.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chisholm. Thank you. Oh, am I still muted? No, I'm not. Thank you so much. Kevin, can I come to you, please, and ask for, you know, in the context of diversity and inclusion, what cross-cultural communication means to you?
Sure, thank you, Hyacinth. How to follow that? I'd start with my area of most engagement and experience, communication. I mean, communications that allow diversity and inclusion. For me, that means it's a choice between, do you want to communicate or do you want to camouflage? You know, camouflage is like closed and protective and controlling, and sort of communications is all about opening up and contributing. So the opening up and contributing type of communication, that supports psychological safety. We can create the safety so that we can live and work boldly. And that really requires that we're vulnerable, willing to be vulnerable, and pretty naked, you know, to let go of part of our identity and just rediscover without burning out. So that's why we need the safety and support from each other. And it's really important at the moment. I was just reading, there's a Harvard Business Review out. They've done a study called Beyond Burnt Out. And it shows that 62% of people last year experienced more burnout than usual. 89% of people last year had a worsening of their work-life sort of balance, you know.
Right.
So I mean, I think we have to really include people with it's an inclusive communication, which means being seen and heard. And amazingly enough, the science says that when I'm seen and heard, it's the same psychological effect on me as experiencing love. So I feel loved when I'm seen and heard. And I mean, you can experience of this is feedback. How do you do feedback at work? When I get positive feedback, I feel included and I get engaged. When I get negative feedback, this is not just me, this is, you know, average person. Negative feedback, sort of confusion, you get a neutral result. I don't really get engaged. No feedback, exclusion, that's the worst. That's like experiencing physical pain, you know? And this is one of the things maybe we want to talk about later in some Q&A, is that, you know, how that works from what I've seen in a Norwegian work culture where people get frozen out because a lot of us are shy away from conflicts.
Yes, wow, thank you, Kevin. Well, we just want to let you know, Kevin, that we see you and we hear you, so feel the love, feel the love, feel the love. There you go, shoulder action. Awesome. And William, we're coming to you in the same, I pose the same question to you. So in the context of diversity and inclusion, what does cross-cultural communication mean to you?
Diversity. Generally, when one hears about diversity or hear the word concept, then
sorry, Will, your sound just dropped out for a second there.
Okay, we think about differences. So if there are differences, then some have to be included. So that is where inclusion comes in. And if we are talking about inclusion, then definitely there will be communication. So the whole idea is there are differences. How do we deal with the differences so that we can communicate together, either verbally or non-verbal? And since the globe keeps getting smaller and becoming like a village, having this discussion is very, very important. A lot is being written about intercultural and cross-cultural competencies, because even within a group, there are differences, and within a group, there's a need for cross-cultural communication. So cross-cultural communication should never be seen as an African and European. No. Within African context, there's a need for cross-cultural communication. Within European context, within Norwegian context, yeah. So this is how I see the connection between diversity, inclusion, and cross-cultural communication.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, William. I'm actually going to come back to you shortly because you've touched on culture there, but I'd just like to say, you know, I'm writing notes as you guys are speaking, the things that are jumping out at me. And Chisholm, I love that you said, you know, it's about providing equitable access to resources. And Kevin, the question that you posed, do you want to communicate or camouflage? That will preach, Kevin. And William, that you said using the power of differences to facilitate communication. I really love that. If anybody in our audience has any other perspectives on what cross-cultural communication means to yourself, by all means, please share it in the chat, and you know, so everybody can see what your understanding or perspective is. If you have any questions, in the chat as well. So, William, I'm going to come back to you, and you know, you mentioned culture, and you know, today we talk about lots of different types of cultural communication. So, we set the stage. Please provide us with a definition of culture. Or what is culture?
My definition or textbook definition, which one do you want? Anyway, what is culture? culture is defined as the sum total of our behavior, our beliefs. Culture is something that we learn from home, from our community. It's a form of education that doesn't take place in a classroom, right? So the name given to us, the food we were introduced to when we were growing up, the language we heard. So culture helps us to belong to a group of people. Culture and the way we are socialized, one can say that it is a form of collective programming. We are expected to behave in the same way. We are expected to eat the same food. So our culture is the reason for us and them. My culture, I mean, I've been brought up to identify problems and find solutions. And thanks to my culture, I'm able to identify problems and solutions. Challenges come when I move out of my culture to a new culture. And that is where this issue of cross-cultural communication comes in. So my understanding of culture is it's me, I'm my culture. Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin, and thank you, Kat, for sharing with us. Kat says, understanding cultural ramifications of how you speak and what you say, we all receive in the context of where we come from and how we were raised. What hurts me might not even register as hurt to others. That's very true. We're in agreement with you there, Kat. So, Chisholm, is there a difference between, I'm going to read this because I've written this out. Is there a difference between multicultural, cross-cultural, and intercultural communication? So that's part one of this question. And then part two, why are these important for successful workplace communication and inclusion? So is there a difference and why are they important?
Thanks, Hyacinth. So I'm about to get a bit excited because this is just like very academic stuff that I'm about to nerd out on. But William just gave a fantastic definition of culture. I just would like to add to it for the context of the definitions that I'm about to hand out. Within this context, I perceive culture as a set of learned values, shared beliefs, and internalized practices among a group of people or an individual, for example. Culture is something we execute and express, and it changes over time. As time passes, we become better at reproducing the cultures that we're part of. And it is important to note that we often partake in multiple cultures at different moments and contexts in our lives. Communication is a cultural practice, and it is shaped by lived experience, intersectionality, and customs. So to define the three types of communication per Hyacinth's question, I'm going to start with multicultural communication. This occurs when people from multiple backgrounds with different ways of communication coexist without in-depth interaction. So think of it as, requiring the presence of multiple cultures with little interaction or integration between groups, who remain largely separate from each other. So to put it into perspective, we can think of multicultural communication as basic prerequisites for the other types of communication, because to have intercultural or cross-cultural communication, more than one culture must be present. So to clarify a little bit here, when people existing in a workplace or a country only interact on a multicultural basis, it is somewhat or actually quite difficult to have meaningful experiences. So in order to move beyond this point, it could, for example, require language acquisition or a shift in attitude, which brings me to intercultural communication. just like multicultural communication, intercultural communication recognizes that multiple cultures coexist in a country, in a society, or in a workplace. And it goes beyond by centering the constructive interactions that are constantly taking place between cultures. And because people can express or embody different or various cultures, then any interactions between two people can theoretically be an intercultural one. So this takes place when whether you speak the same language or not, as William said, and we might be able to say that intercultural communication is more visible when it happens across, languages. So culture and language resources or training is important to adapt to a new workplace or society, because it involves learning about perspective and practices of our new environment. So intercultural communication requires that we are self-aware and that we take responsibility for self as an active participant in multiple cultures. And in turn, it allows us to enhance and deepen our own perspectives, which brings me to cross-cultural communication, which is the topic of today's discussion. So cross-cultural communication is often used interchangeably with intercultural communication, but they're actually quite different. The primary distinction between the two is the comparison between two or more cultures. So the key word being comparison. So in academia, we might find a researcher objectively trying to analyze the communication styles for the same framework or settings in different cultures. As Kat said, what might hurt one person might not even resonate with another person. So for example, how might two women from different cultural groups handle, say, a conversation with their boss about equal pay? Or how might they perform at a job interview? Nonetheless, it is important to note here that sometimes the patterns found in a case study might be generalized and boxed into personality attributes that are supposedly applicable to all women from that specific culture. But that is a really wrong way of perceiving culture. So we must be careful with assumptions and generalizations and preconceived notions. Comparing a group's peculiarities or behavior does not explain that entire culture, and it is not indicative of everyone within that culture. And at the same time, it does not mean that everyone from a particular group is completely different. So this is why the topic of culture is very complex. So any type of communication can involve all three types of communication, that I just defined. So intercultural, cross-cultural, and multicultural communications, because we're exposed to different variants in society. And just to wrap up, I'd like to think that all of us here today, we practice different types of communication to a degree because we interact with different people, and we always hope to find common ground even when we don't speak the same language. One thing that all people and cultures have in common is the need to be acknowledged, seen, heard, and understood. So to answer the last part of the question on why it is important for workplace communication and inclusion, I would say that knowing the difference between the three frameworks is important for anyone going into an unfamiliar cultural context when we interact with others at work or in a society. Knowledge is power, and with experience and training, we can learn to engage in these moments with a right and nuanced mentality to communicate effectively and also to use compassion. So hopefully that is kind of clear.
Wow, thank you so much, Chisholm. We are 3 questions in. Do you guys see the caliber and quality of the info that you're getting here today? I think we need some shoulder action for what we've been receiving so far. I think it's just been, woo! Man, you're blowing some brains here. You guys are on fire. Guys, I will ask you as well to keep your eye on the communication coming in from our beautiful participants. Stina was asking you to just clarify, Chisholm, a point that you made, difference between intercultural and cross-cultural. I believe the answer is yes, but you may want to clarify a little bit more than that. Thank you so much, guys. Marta saying after 6 years, herself who's Polish and her husband who's Swedish, they're still learning how to communicate efficiently through their cultural differences. 2 countries, barely a few hours away, and we still stumble upon things that need to be explained and discussed. I won't read the rest of that, but yes, it's so imperative to learn how to communicate effectively. Thank you for sharing that with us, Marta. So Kevin, now I'm going to come to you, and I saw that you were just about to relax, but no time for relaxation, Kevin. I'm going to put you in the firing line now. So, going off what Chisholm has shared with us and what William has so beautifully shared with us as well, what is intercultural awareness and intercultural empathy? What are they? And why are they important for successful cross-cultural communication in the workplace?
Thank you,
Did you get that?
Yes, I did. I'm
Okay.
just taking my deep breaths in as I'm going to be in the firing line. I'm going to put myself in the firing line afterwards, but I'm going to continue from Chisholm with nerding out a little bit, as she called it. On skillful communications, this ability to listen, notice, understand, and respond in an appropriate way with our communication. And for me, Chisholm said knowledge is power. I would say awareness is superpower. And I'm a sci-fi fan, and I mean it's a superpower. We must be clear and slow. Well, if we're going to be clear, we have to slow down and simplify things. We have to monotask. That's the only way we can really be present and aware. So we all think that, of course, we're present and aware. I'm here. I can see William sitting there. I can see some people up there. I can see out the window. Of course, I'm here. But all the science says that 50% of the time, half the time, I'm at work, at home, at play, I'm not actually here. My mind is taking me off somewhere else. So half the time, I'm not aware and present. And that leads to things like, one piece of research said 70–80% of our work life is fueled by stress, survival mode. And that's because we're allowing ourselves to get distracted, triggered all the time. We're not sort of, choosing our focus. And when we do that, we sort of over-focus on all the external stuff, and we lose that connection with the internal, our inner life, our inner intuition, all the compassion, all the other things that come from having a connection with the inside. And so that's the be present side of things. That's the awareness. If we're looking at empathy, I would say for me, that means you have to be kind. You have to be present, you have to be kind. You'd say, of course, I'm kindness, and I'm naturally sort of kind person to myself and others. Science says 80% of the time we're mostly negative, judgmental, self-critical, all that stuff, unless we're bringing some more awareness into what we're doing. And what goes along with this is creativity, is that when I'm unaware, disconnected, not kind, then I can hardly be creative. And the science says the same thing. 90% of the time we're on autopilot, or we've got this narrow perspective. So we just default to what's familiar and our biases. And then, of course, how can we hope to go from, what was it, Norwegian to Polish culture, or whatever the example was now, when we're in that space where there's very little empathy, we're not creative, we're not present. So what happens with us is when we keep repeating these autopilots, there's certainly no recipe for understanding or dialogue or intercultural empathy or anything else. And when we repeat it, it becomes this sort of narrow mindset. It actually, when we do it enough times, repeat our mental emotional patterns enough times, it actually gets fixed in my body. It changes my chemistry, which changes me at a cellular level. So of course it feels natural. So like being this way just feels like, well, this is me, it's natural, you know? So I can't, you know, I get very irritated with people when I'm in organizations who just say, just change your mindset, you know, it's nonsense, you know? We've got to learn to change mode if we're going to have any chance of changing our behavior. And I call that the doobie-doobie-doo methodology, which is, that's your cue, Hyacinth, actually, for doing some, you know, it's like, it's probably Frank Sinatra, doobie-doobie-doo. But we need, and if we're going to doobie-doobie-doo our way through life, we need these superpowers of presence, positivity, and purpose, the 3 Ps. That was me nerding out. Let's do something, seeing as I'm talking about doobie-doobie-doo. I'd like to do an experiment. It just takes a very short while, Hyacinth, but I'd like everyone to get involved. And the first thing is, I'm going to try and be a little bit naked and vulnerable. And I just like everybody who's in at the moment, just to take a look at me. And who do you see? And I'd love you to write that into the chat. Who do you see at the moment? Just throw some words in there in the chat. And I would love, Hyacinth, if it's possible, if you could collate what's in the chat, just throw it back to me after this session for my own valuable feedback and insight. Yeah.
Certainly. Wow. A wise man. Intelligent.
As people are doing that, I'm going to do the other side of this, which is the diversity facet of this side. So I'm going to share my diversity. Whatever you saw, these are the facets of my identity I've used through the years to create me. Let's see how many of you I managed to include or exclude with this list. So, abandoned child, unloved, working class, middle class, black sheep, bully, racing cyclist, victim, punk, Rasta, ghostwriter, filmmaker, meditator, anti-apartheid activist, group worker, journalist, environmentalist, man, father, outsider, leader, British, Buddhist, vegetarian, expat. I could go on and on.
Wow.
Be interesting to see how inclusive and exclusive that was for the audience today.
Wow. Kevin, I have to give you some shoulder action there. That was, woo! Wow. Well, you know, that was beautiful. I love how you shared with us there all the facets of yourself through your journey that have shaped who you are today and what everybody sees, a perspective, which really paints a much bigger picture of how we perceive the world. You know, we don't know the full story. We only know a smidgen. A smidgen. Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. Thank you. Whew. So now I'm going to fly on the beautiful wave of that awesomeness, and I'm going to come and land with you, William. More calmness, more sereneness. And I'm going to ask you this, William. So from a societal perspective, what are some of the challenges to cross-cultural communication in society?
Kevin, are you a mind reader? I mean, it's like you were in my thoughts when I was preparing for this discussion, conversation, because I was going to ask, if people see me, what do they see? You see an individual, automatically your thoughts, you know, so many things happen, and what you've read about somebody like me on CNN comes up, what you've been told by friends, yeah, he's an African, maybe he has a name that I cannot pronounce, you know. So these thoughts definitely will affect the way you would want to communicate with me, because of a fallacy of hasty conclusion. You've already concluded, you know this guy, He's black. Maybe he's dealing in drugs. Maybe I don't know anything. So you've made this assumption. How are we going to communicate? If you have all these assumptions about William, you have disqualified me before allowing me to say a word. So that even if I have the competencies you are looking for, you've disqualified me. How can we communicate? A bit of ignorance, a bit of arrogance, a bit of misunderstanding, a bit of assumptions, and a bit of this so-called thing we like throwing around, common sense. What is common sense? In Norway, it's common sense to stand in a queue, to take a bus, or to go to a pharmacy shop. You take a queue lap, right? And you wait for your turn. In some societies, that common sense wouldn't work. So why should you tell me to use my common sense when we have differences in what we identify as common sense? So the challenges with cross-cultural communication, to me, the most important one is all the myths that we have created over the years, all the false narratives that has been reinforced when we were going to school. So there are so many things that makes it challenging. For example, you read in textbook about individualistic societies and society of collectivism, right? So you see me, an African, collective William. But in reality, you find individualism in collective society. The context may be different, and that is what matters. We talk about certain group of people not having emotions. All human beings have emotions, but when we show our emotions may be different. How do you show love to a beautiful Norwegian woman? Are you going to give her something from Ghana, which, no. What a rose flower would do for a Norwegian woman, I'm generalizing here, something else would do for another woman. So one should be aware of all these differences to be able to communicate, both verbally, non-verbal communication. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, William. I am basking in the brilliance of the panel today. Mark the date, everybody, mark the date. Many of you are going to walk away from this conversation changed and transformed on the inside. There's some real gems and pearls of wisdom that are being dropped on you today, and you may actually need some time to digest what's coming at you today, because this is just real beauty. I love you said a fallacy of hasty conclusions leads to being disqualified, leads to disqualification, and that's before we even get to awareness or empathy. Wow, thank you so much for sharing, William. And so, Chisholm, we're going to come to you, and I'm going to ask you the same question about cross-cultural communication, but what is the importance of it in the workplace, and how can we achieve successful cross-cultural communication in the workplace?
I'm still kind of recovering from Kevin and William. That was Wow. Thank you. I have to digest all of that. But to answer your question, from a workplace perspective, what are some barriers to cross-cultural communication? I will maybe name the top three that comes to mind. And the first is ethnocentrism. And I think William has touched on it. We have a natural tendency to look at other people or people of other cultures through our own lens. You know, where ethnocentrism is concerned, we implicitly believe that our way of doing things and our way of being is the only or the right way. You know, so it leads us to judge it leads us to judge others or behaviors that don't necessarily conform with how we view the world. And as a result, we negatively judge people that don't conform to our world vision. And this is one of the main causes of the us versus them mentality, which, you know, can lead to quite a number of damaging consequences. The second that comes to mind is stereotyping. Individuals are unique. You can and should never predict a person's behavior or work ethic based on their nationality, race, gender, or religion. This can be extremely detrimental at worst, and at best, it can lead us to have unconscious biases towards others that we deem different from us. The third that I can think about is a cultural clash or conflicting values. You know, cultural clash manifests when people's behaviors compromise our values or vision of the world. So when we don't understand or agree with a behavior, it just really means that there are conflicting values at play. So common cultural clashes within a workplace can show up in communication styles. So if we look at direct versus indirect communication, in the Netherlands, where I have lived for about 3 years, it is quite professional and appreciated to speak clearly, so you leave no room for misunderstanding. In Norway, it is my relative experience that people prefer to communicate indirectly. You know, the challenge, of course, in both cases is that one might consider the Dutch or relatively direct way of communicating as insensitive or rude, whereas the Norwegian relative indirect way of communicating could be considered to be disingenuous or imprecise. So if you think about another culture clash, you know, it could be structured, structured or flexible scheduling. So in some cultures, people strictly adhere to schedule, whereas in others, they treat it as a suggestion. So my West African brothers and sisters here can appreciate that when we say, let's have a meeting in 30 minutes, that can mean tomorrow. Whereas in Germany or in the UK, not starting a meeting in 30 minutes is likely, you know, disrespectful. So just a quick example of an experience I had when I moved to the south of the US in America to study for my bachelor's degree. My freshman year, I didn't have a car. So a friend was supposed to pick me up to take me to Walmart because I didn't have a car. And when I spoke to him, he said, I'm on my way. I'll be there in a minute. 20 minutes later, I called him. He said, I'll be there in a minute. 2 hours later, I called him and he said, I'll be there in a minute. He eventually showed up like 5 hours later. And I learned that day that in the South, I'll be there in a minute is a figure of speech to mean I'll be there as soon as I can. So I think that another way to think about how culture clash can show up as a challenge in the workplace within cross-cultural communication is to think about egalitarian versus hierarchical a workplace based on hierarchy. Countries like Norway and Sweden, they have a more flat, you know, working culture where people can voice their opinions and they tend to speak up. In countries like, say, Nigeria or Morocco, there's relatively more hierarchy in the workplace. So people might not feel freely, feel so free to speak up when their bosses are in the room. So these are the three top that come to my head. So it's the stereotyping, the culture clash, and the ethnocentrism.
Thank you so much, Chisholm. Thank you. So we, just to let everybody know and slightly reset the room a little bit, you know, this section of the conversation is scheduled for 90 minutes. We are now 50 minutes through, so we've only got 40 minutes left of this section. I know that I can see many nods, and I can see there are a lot of people who have really been digesting a lot of the information here. Don't forget to submit your questions, because in 40 minutes time we will get to the Q&A section where we will answer your questions and bring you into the conversation. Okay, so thank you. Maybe these guys are doing such a phenomenal job of explaining that there are no questions, but we can still have an open conversation together. So thank you so much. So Kevin, I'm going to come to you and ask you, how can we use cross-cultural communication to resolve conflict?
Thanks, Hyacinth, and thanks for the time check as well. I'll try and be brief and to the point. I was reading how diverse teams are 33% more profitable in some way. And that's been, you know, bandied around all over the place. But the thing is, it's, you know, that also creates more disagreements, more conflicts, which is, you know, lots of discomfort, and it's challenging for most of us. And it can quickly turn into chaos unless we know how to embrace difference. And for me, that process is driven by, you know, I have to include and acknowledge my own patterns of thinking, feeling, and doing. And once I'm there with that acceptance practice, then I generally have to take quite a few deep breaths and wait. And sometimes it's just a 1 second pause that's needed, so I don't go, you know, to this little bit of distance from my autopilot, my automatic reactions. And once I've waited that second, usually I'm clear enough to make wise choices and be creative again. And that's something completely different, that acceptance practice, than what I see a lot of, which is resistance and repression. I remember one conversation with a manager who said he'd just been up to headquarters where they'd said, we now have a 0 accident policy. Now he came back to me and we talked about it, and he said after a while, you know, actually what that means is a 0 truth policy, isn't it? And I agree with him totally, you know, because when you decide that, you know, we're going to have 0 accidents, you just negate in reality. We are going to have accidents. How do we communicate and deal with them, you know? So there was going to be no truth. And that's what had happened in quite a few other workplaces too. 0 policy, accident policy meant nobody talked about the accidents that happened, which is very about face. Quick anecdote, if we have time for that. I used to live on Findorn. One night I came home to the place I was living in. There was a musician who was an alcoholic who was visiting, and he attacked me verbally and almost physically, and I had to sit down with him and talk. He felt like a real victim. He wanted to say to me, I was a runner at the time, and he said, you know, you're so fit and you can run all day, and look at me, I'm drinking too much and I'm in a real state. And, you know, so it was sort of victim place. And as we started to talk, I was trying to tell him that, you know, I was running because I was depressive, seriously depressive at the time. And we found out that that was our common ground. We were both avoiding pain, him with the alcohol, me with the depression, really allowing myself into that depression and wallowing in it. We were both becoming victims. We found some common ground there. And after a while, 2 or 3 nights of like him playing guitar and us drinking together and me running and stuff, we made a sort of pact that we were going to use what we were doing there as practice for our individual development and for reconnecting and including other people in our lives. He was using his music in a much better way, and I was using this running in a much better way. A couple of years on, I returned to Findorn, and then I returned with the Peace Marathon. I'm running a peace marathon along with a bunch of people who run a marathon around the world for peace. So what I'm saying really is that this, you know, conflict resolution is about creativity, using that type of creativity to work yourself out of your patterns. And, you know, mostly people in our age, I don't know how many people here are below 35, but people are 35 plus, we don't have much creativity left unless we're doing something very active about it. There was a huge European study done years ago that said that at the age of 5, we're 90% creative. 90% new things in our minds, in our feelings, in our actions the whole time. By the time we've hit 35, we're down to 10%. We're just using this fairly redundant set of thoughts, feelings, and actions that are going on auto repeat. Thankfully, these days, we now know that we can change this behavior ourselves and our patterns, even down to the chemistry in cells, so that I feel like a new me. I can bring a new me to new situations with a little bit of a mental emotional practice, for sure, or quite a lot most of the time.
Thank
I
you.
should stop there. I should stop there.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. Thank you. I have quite a lot of questions to still get through, and we've got 30 minutes to get through these now, so we're powering through. Thank you so much. You know, what you're sharing with us is really phenomenal. I see the chat is blowing up. People are really engaging in communication, which is fantastic. So thank you to our wonderful panelists. William, I'd just like to come back to you because you have experience in facilitating training for cross-cultural coaches, right? I believe that you mentioned that earlier. And they provide guidance on cultural orientation to UN refugees. So what are some of the most important tools of cross-cultural communication a person can learn and implement to ensure effective cross-cultural communication in their society or workplace? So as a trainer who's training, you know, or facilitating and training coaches who provide guidance to UN refugees, what are some of the most important cross-cultural communicational tools that you can use? You're on mute.
Can you rephrase the question, please?
Yes, certainly. So you mentioned that you do cross-cultural training for coaches, and you provide guidance on cross-cultural orientation for UN refugees. So based on your work that you've been doing with the training, what are some of the most important tools that a person can learn to use and implement when it comes to cross-cultural communication?
Yes, yeah, I do, not only me, but then a team of colleagues, we do train facilitators or coaches who travel abroad to give cultural orientation to...
Sorry to interrupt you, William. Your sound has just gone off a little bit.
Hello, do you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay.
much better.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I said that, yes, I do organize training programs for cross-cultural facilitators who travel abroad to give orientation to Norway-bound UN refugees. And yeah, part of the training involves talking about communication. And then, so when there is communication, there is always a need to listen, right? So listening, it's very important. Trying to explain things using audio-visual aids when you are conducting training. In any teaching methodologies, we say that one always has to move from the known to the unknown. It makes teaching much easier. You start from a reference point that the people who are going to travel to a new country or the people who are going to start a new workplace. And this is also true for diplomats. When diplomats are being posted to new societies, they get training on cross-cultural communication. They get to see video, how people communicate in that society, both verbal and non-verbal. To share with you an experience when my mother visited me in Germany many years ago. You do this, choose auf Wiedersehen. It means bye-bye, see you soon, right? Meanwhile, where I originally come from, this can mean come, right? So a symbol that has two different meanings. So if I'm not aware that this means bye-bye, and when you say bye-bye, you go apart from each other. But then my mother was going because she understood this to mean come. She would say, she's calling me, but she's going away. What is wrong? And the German woman who wasn't expecting my mom to come to her would be like, no, but normally when you say bye-bye, you depart from each other. This is a classical example of miscommunication. One symbol that has two different meanings in different contexts. So when you are conducting training on cross-cultural communication, one has to give examples. One has to explain the possible challenges. One has to use video, one has to use case studies. And there are many tools out there, but because of lack of time, I will expect more questions and then we take it from there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, William. I really like the example that you used there of, a mix-up in communication and how simple it is for us to communicate in the wrong way. So, thank you for that example. So Chisholm, we're going to come back to you. And I know you've had some time to sit back and just digest what the gentlemen on the panel have been sharing with us. So I want to ask you, is there a better or possibly more accurate term than cultural competence to describe individuals' ability to interact with each other's or another culture? So is there a more accurate term or a better term than cultural competence, would you say?
Yes. To clarify the term cultural competence, it is not circumspect or nuanced enough. For starters, one cannot be competent in all cultures, and competence in 1, 2, or 3 cultures is not sufficient in a multicultural world to claim cultural competence. Nonetheless, I think intercultural literacy or competence, or cross-culturally responsive or informed, could be a better, more nuanced term to use, because I think these terms acknowledge that there is a two or multi-way process that requires active listening and learning from each other. So you don't claim, so just to reduce it to kind of what annoys me in my work as an economist is sometimes I go to sessions and I see, say an American claiming to be an African expert, and I'm sitting here, an African, I can't even claim that I'm a Nigerian expert. So we need to be careful with how we use words.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Could you just repeat the 2 suggestions that you gave there of alternatives, just so that everybody, because I saw people writing furiously, just to ensure that people actually got those terms?
So I think instead of cultural competence, I think it's probably better to use cross-culturally responsive or informed. And the other one is intercultural literacy or intercultural competence, because it leaves room for growth and learning.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Hope everybody got that for the people that I saw writing there. Thank you. Okay, so William, where does the responsibility lie for a new employee, for example, and the person who's already an employee, for example, a company, management or leader? Where does the responsibility lie for embracing the cross-cultural communication between the new person and the existing employee or the management. Yes. Sorry, you're muted. It's okay, I do it all the time.
It's a two-way adjustment highway, let me put it that way, so that both that individual who has joined an organization has a responsibility, and then also the leadership also has a responsibility. So it has to be a two-way adjustment, ensuring that, yes, we are talking about culture, and then there is also organizational culture, right, which is different from the general culture that we normally know, or yeah. So when a new person starts a new job, there should be a form of cultural orientation for the person to understand how things are done, and then it's the leadership's responsibility to ensure that this new person is provided with all the tools, everything the person needs, because in Ghana, we generally say that there are many ways of making groundnut soup. So if you don't teach me how to make, I wouldn't say jollof rice, because I don't want any Ghanaian, Nigerian fight on this. So groundnut soup is better. Now, so there are many ways of doing things. So it is the organization's responsibility to inform the new arrival how things are done in this organization. And then the new arrival should be flexible enough to make changes in his or her way of doing things. So this is my take on this issue. Yeah.
Thank you so much, William. And thank you for trying to avoid a full-on war between the cultures here. Thank you. So, Kevin, I'm going to come to you now. And I was just wondering, what are some of the principles of communication that individuals or management, for example, could apply to ensure, so what are some of the principles of communication that individuals or management can apply to ensure that their ability to communicate is not corrupted by negative judgment or preconceived notions? So you mentioned this before, about, I think William mentioned it and you mentioned it, about the preconceived notions or negative judgments before even knowing someone. So what are some of the principles of communication that we can apply to avoid that?
Thanks, Isaac. I'm going to just do that as some bullet points to stay brief. So which, we can put in the chat for people to discuss or whatever. But I just wanted to respond, if I can, just to something that William said. He said a lot of really interesting things, but it was just about what's individual your responsibility in an organization, and what's the organization's responsibility. Here it was in terms of onboarding people, but it can be whatever. Because for me, it's what's interesting to look at there is, like, in a sense, when you're out there in the world, in an organization, in a culture, whatever it is, you create a sort of footprint. Yeah, your footprint in the world. And the truer that footprint is to who I am and my identity, as I believe I am at the moment, the more impact it has. So my responsibility then as an individual is to stay clear and communicate my truth. So that's individual responsibility, and to embrace others' truth as well. That's part of it for sure. But then the organization, my impact on other people is, it depends on the culture, depends on the environment where I put that footprint, So that's the collective and organizational responsibility for me, is a culture that allows our footprints to have the impact and bring out the potential that we have. So that was just to respond to what my good friend, or I hope to be a good friend of, William. But yeah, principles of communication. I would say 3-level listening, dialogue and speaking is one thing to think of. The 3 levels, one is like being attentive to what's actually being said, and that includes body language, intended meaning, all the things you can pick up. All the things you can pick up depends on being really connected at the same time to my inner responses, my intuition, the bias which might come up when I'm listening to what's being said. So that's the 2nd level. And the 3rd level is being aware of surroundings. In William's example of the wave, the symbol, I used to work in conflict resolution center in London, where we had to go in and reconcile 2 families that lived next door to each other, a 3-year feud between family of Indian origins and a standard sort of English West Cockney family. And it started on the 2nd day they moved in. The Cockney lady leaned over the fence to the Indian lady as she walked past and waved. And of course, the Indian lady thought, you know, why does she want me to go away? We've just moved in. And it started there. They never got to check that out. And 3 years on, there was a violent feud going on. So that's, you know, awareness of surroundings, context. Well, so what does this mean, you know, where I am at the moment? I've got another little model, which I call the Kfc model, because it's easy to remember, because most people like chicken. I'm a vegetarian, I don't, but I like Kfc model, which is kind, focused, and curious. So for communication that's open, aware of other people, is kind to those responses in me, to what's being said, give people a bit of slack, is focused, that I'm really staying with it and not disappearing into my past examples and predispositions and stuff. And I'm curious, you know, so what does Chisholm actually mean when she sits there looking like that and things, you know, is she bored? Is she engaged? Is she off somewhere thinking about what she's going to say next? I don't know. Stay curious. So that's KFC. And then as a Buddhist, Buddha said that right speech and communication has 4 principles. And this is a checklist, really. When I'm communicating, does it promote harmony and goodwill? Does it reduce anger and tension? Is it useful? Is it truthful? So that's an easy checklist I have posted around lots of walls, but in my office space and wherever, because it's an easy thing for me. As I'm sitting in that, if I'm writing that email, if I'm sitting on that phone conversation, I can easily think, you know, is this going to reduce anger and tensions? Is it useful, truthful? So I think that would be my 3 quick models, bullet point lists.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you so much. That was very practical, Kevin, because it was apparent to me, you know, as you were sharing the story of what happened in London, you know, it just shows us how easy it is to get things wrong, how easy it is to get communication wrong. And so it's vitally important that we're all trying to continue to grow and to learn. So thank you for the points that you shared. Just let everybody know we will be sending a follow-up email to all participants that have attended this event today, and we will share with you the tips that the panelists have given and any resources, just to make sure that, I know sometimes you want to listen rather than take notes because then you miss something when you're writing, but we will send these tips to you just so that you have them in writing. So we are fastly running out of time, and so Chisholm, I just wanted to ask you, what are some of the challenges that leaders may face when it comes to CCC, you know, as we're talking about now, communication? What are some of the challenges that leaders may face, and, you know, what are the benefits in the workplace? And just really quickly.
Okay, so some challenges, I'm going to say one. I think one of the challenge, we could look at psychological barriers. So because to successfully lead or manage cross-cultural teams, leaders need to be flexible. It's not easy to deviate from our natural preferences because doing so might feel inauthentic. But this comes with the territory of leading people who come from different backgrounds. So for a personal example, you know, when I work with my team, you know, the way I am, if I don't tell you something is wrong, expect that everything is fantastic. And when I do say something could be better, it does not negate all the, you know, the great things you've done. But I also realize that this does not always translate for my team. They might sometimes think that even when I don't say something, I might not be satisfied with their work. So I've learned, and I continue to learn, to communicate in a way that does not dampen, you know, their confidence. So when we look at psychological barriers, I'm reminded of a question, sorry, like something I read a while ago about an European man, maybe a Frenchman, who had gone to America to lead a team, but his team struggled with his French way of giving feedback because it centered on, you know, what was wrong rather than what was done well. And as a result, they started feeling less confident about their abilities. So even though he knew what the problem was, he thought that changing to fit the US way was a bit too inauthentic. So he returned back to, you know, his country. So he had a psychological barrier that prevented him from being flexible and understanding that even though it's not his preferred way, the American way is not wrong. And that got in the way of things. So I guess in this case, then the obvious benefits of cross-cultural communication is that it reduces conflict, it helps people feel understood, valued, and respected. So that would be my quick answer.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you so much. And Emma, just to address your comment there, thank you so much for, you know, commenting, and to all attendees for commenting. Emma, I just want to say that was this is a classic case of misunderstanding cross-cultural communication. That's my British way of saying, ain't no playing here, girl. We're asking some hard questions, so there was no harm meant from my side either, just so you know that. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up now. And we're coming to, we're 19 minutes past 2, so we have 11 minutes left of this section. Get your questions in, everybody. We're coming to you. We're going to start answering your questions. But before we do that, I always, in every session, like to leave you with practical tips. Before I get to the practical tips, I'm going to ask one more question, and that is going to be to you, William. And the question that I would like to ask you, for companies that do have diverse and multicultural teams, how might management or leadership incorporate a culture of cross-cultural awareness? So they've already got the multicultural team, but how do they then institute, you know, a culture of cross-cultural awareness and communication, good communication?
That's a very good question. They should get experts like Chisom to come and talk to the staff members on the importance of being aware of cross-cultural issues and possible challenges. You know, sometimes we don't want to talk about differences. We should be aware of differences, cultural differences that can create issues and deal with them. And there are so many experts out there, so many training programs out there for organizations to be made aware of possible traps. When it's lunchtime, for example, maybe I may want to eat alone in my office. You know, what does it mean? Does it mean I'm a social person who doesn't want to come into contact with the rest of my colleagues? Maybe I don't want to come into contact because over the years they've been asking me questions like, when are you going back to where you come from? Which is an innocent question to the questioner, but to me, maybe they don't want me here, you know? So there are so many issues that can be taken up in workshops, in seminars, just to get people to be aware of challenges that can arise out of not knowing. Yeah, thank you.
I want to add
Wonderful.
something to this, Hyacinth, actually, just quickly.
You have 1 minute, Chisholm.
Good luck. When talking about this, I think it's, especially from a workplace perspective, I think it's important to define, where the responsibility lie. And as I, listened to William, I found myself thinking about it. And I think that it is important that we know that it's not just on leadership, because oftentimes when we talk about diversity and inclusion, the responsibility often falls to leadership, but I think it's both on leadership and the individual. So from an individual perspective, I think it's important to continually work to assess your assumptions, your preconceived notions, your unconscious or implicit biases, and your privilege. And no matter no matter what, say you've had a previous experience with somebody from a same country or that same person in a different context, within a workplace setting, we must endeavor to approach each interaction on a clean slate, with compassion, empathy, emotional intelligence, curiosity, like, Kevin said. As an individual, you are not powerless in this interaction. So take power and take responsibility. So for leaders, it is their responsibility to set the stage and lead by examples, put policies in place that support the type of inclusive workplace culture you want to exist in. When hiring, consider diversifying your pool. Don't hire for cultural fits, hire for cultural contribution or cultural add, as it's called. And conflict will arise when working with a diverse and multicultural team. There will be conflict, there will be uncomfortable situations, that will arise. Lean into them, sit with that discomfort and find an inclusive and equitable way out of it. So just create a culture of open and honest communication and safe feedback loops, which Hyacinth is super good at. So lead with grace, compassion, empathy, and humility. So I want to say that for leaders here, this is what you can do. For individuals here, you have power. Take some responsibility in that power. That's what I wanted to add.
Awesome, thank you, Chisholm. So Emma, I think you got an answer already to your question. Yep, I see some shoulder movement going on there. So thank you so much, Chisholm. That was really, really, really brilliant. So we're going to end with my favorite question to all three panelists, and we've got 6 minutes to do it. So you've got 2 minutes each. Please share with us your top 3 tips for effective cross-cultural communication. Kevin, go.
Thanks, Hyacinth. Okay, number 1 is accept negativity. Back to, reference to my friend with his zero accident policy, actually being a zero truth policy. So accepting negativity is the only way forward. And as you're doing that, you have to at the same time nurture positivity. That for me can be a whole bunch of fake it until you make it exercises. It can be encouraging fuck up nights. It can be, which are a mistake to make it situations, I think. Or it can be a practice like I try and introduce at meetings, which is to be an angel's advocate. Don't be a devil's advocate, be an angel's advocate. In our meetings, in our office, if William suggests something, the next person to talk has to support that, find something supportive to say about it. If they can't find something to support it, they keep that zipped. So that's being an angel's advocate. That creates psychological safety and creativity, and everything else follows on from that. So accept negativity and nurture positivity. That's number 1. Number 2 is please bring more being into doing. To change our behavior, we need clarity, because that leads to insights. And for me, that can be very simple. It can mean when William says something I disagree with, before I respond, I take 2 deep breaths. In that 1 second gap, that is the difference between a fearful response and engagement. So deep breathing is the difference there. If I respond and my breathing is shallow, I go to fear and I will respond from fear. If I deep breathe 2 times, the fear changes to excitement and engagement, and I respond to William in that way, which would be now, give it up. There we go.
Oh, great, thank you. And your point number 3? Was that all three? I thought
No,
we
I'll
got
be
two.
cheeky with number 3. It's why don't you explore this with me? Join my presence, positivity and purpose mini course, which we're doing at Her Space in May. It'll be on Zoom, but you know, who knows? It'll be physical in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. So you heard it here first. Positivity mini course, positivity and was it purpose? Mini course?
Presence, positivity
Presence,
and
there we
purpose.
go, in May. So we will send those details as well in the follow-up. Okay, so thank you for those 3 tips, Kevin. William, we are going to come to you and then we will close with Chisholm, close this section.
Okay. Any individual we meet, we should see the person as a fellow human being.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't put that individual in a box. Maybe an African, maybe an European. No. Meet the person as an individual. And when you do that, you get to know the person better. 2, that individual doesn't represent the group he belongs to. That individual represents him or herself. 3, each one of us have 3 uniquenesses. We have our human nature, we have the cultural part of us that we learn and makes us belong to a group. And most importantly, we have the personality, character part, which most of the time helps us more than the culture we come from. So this will be my 3 points. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Furiously writing away there. And Chisholm, we're going to close this section with you. Now, Chisholm's going to share her 3 top tips, practical takeaways. If there are any questions for the next section, please drop your questions in the comments box because now we're coming to you, a wonderful audience. So Chisholm, your 3 takeaways, please.
My 3 top takeaways. First, avoid preconceptions and so preconceived notions and stereotypes because they occur when we have oversimplified or generalized characteristics that we use to judge a group of people, an individual associated with a group. So reducing the default behavior to seeing things as good or bad without really understanding the intent. So I think I really want to emphasize here that I think it's important that everyone on this call understands that you have power. You have the power to bridge gaps. You have the power to create division. So both the individuals, the employees, and the leaders on here, you will fumble, you will make mistakes along the way. And that's a part of the process. And it's okay to make mistakes. The best learnings, come out of mistakes. So just keep learning, get some training, and make progress. The second is to be very mindful of nonverbal communication or misinterpretation. So we send and receive nonverbal, messages. So when Harrison goes, do that, it's a nonverbal, right, communication. And it's really important to be mindful of what people were saying versus what they're telling us. So just really quick story here. When I was younger, I went back to Nigeria with my mom. She took me to a country club, or her country club, and she was talking to some of her friends. They were eating some food and they had offered me food. And the friend goes, "Hey, Chisom, would you like some?" I look at my mom for her approval. And my mom responds, my mom's friend goes, "Chika, is it okay for Chisom to have some food?" And my mom responds, "Sure, if she's hungry." And I look at my mom, and what she really said is, "Don't you dare." So I politely declined, and I said, "Thank you very much, ma'am. I'm not hungry." So we always have to be mindful of what people are actually telling us when they're using words and their bodies. And lastly, practice active listening. Restate or summarize what the other person has said so you can ensure that you understood them correctly. ask questions. You know, it helps to build rapport, and it ensures that we don't misinterpret, miss, or assume something and miss an important information. I think when it comes to active listening, you also need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And when you feel uncomfortable, I don't think it's a negative feeling. Like my friends, my team, people who know me will tell you, like, when I feel uncomfortable, I really love it, because I'm just like, I need to sit with this for a second and dig deep. And I think that is where a lot of learning comes as well. So if you actively listen, you don't assume. So if Hyacinth goes, I'm like, Hyacinth, what does that mean? Like, does that mean I agree, or don't play with me? So things to keep in mind, top tips. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I sat here laughing away because I had many of those experiences with my mother as well. And so I totally understand what you were saying there. So we have finished the panel discussion section of this meeting today. And thank you so much to our wonderful panelists for everything that you've been sharing with us. We're not going to release you just yet because we are coming to our audience. So I see that people have been commenting, throwing in some questions now, which is great. Now, I just need to know that everybody's still with us, so give us some shoulder action, shake it up a little bit. For those of you who are not on camera, use your emojis, give us a hand up, something, just make sure there's some life, get some blood flowing. Right. Okay, so now we're going to go into the Q&A section. Thank you guys for, as well, being so engaged throughout this whole time. Oh, I would like to start with Erica. So Erica mentioned, and now the comment has just escaped me. Oh, here we go. Erica said here, oh, my screen is moving away. Yes, Erica said, I find it a little bit confusing when we talk about communication in Norwegian culture, because they seem to be straightforward for some things but indirect for others. I guess there's no simple way to answer, but I will appreciate if anyone could share their experience in this regard. Now, I was going to answer that and say, ask a Norwegian, because that's going to be the best person to give you an answer on this. But then we did have a Norwegian that responded to this, and that was Vera. So, Vera, could I just ask you to unmute and actually share with us, because you said even Norwegians struggle to communicate with each other. So could I just ask you to expound upon that? Just use 30 to 60 seconds just to answer that for us.
Yeah, what I had some problems with the sound, but
oh, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay, good. I think I'm not very stereotyped Norwegian, so I felt like I was kind of generalized because all Norwegians are different as well. So I very often experience that I have trouble communicate with other Norwegians because I communicate quite directly.
Yeah.
So I think that's what we all have to have in mind is that, as I said in the panel, that we have to learn people to know and not make what's the word? Assumptions, yes. Assumptions, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing with us, Vera. Now, Vera didn't know that I was going to throw her under the bus there and ask her to speak, but I thought, you know, it would be great to get an answer from a Norwegian. I could see a lot of head nodding, and it alludes to what William was saying earlier about even within cultures, you know, we're not all the same and there can be vast differences. So thank you so much.
If I could say something here, sorry.
Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to add that because I commented to this as well. And I think that's why, you know, when I talk about, or when you did ask me about cultural competence and my irritation with that all-encompassing thing, I think it's really important to use relative when we are describing or comparing, because it shows some level of nuance that we understand that this is not set in stone for every single person or because it is true that you can have people even within the same culture. I mean, my sister and I, we've grown up in the same space, but we're completely different and we react to things differently. So even though we are blood, we're different. So I think like just having that in mind, and when comparing cultures, to know that, you know, when I say something like, in my experience, the Dutch a bit more direct than the Norwegians, does not mean Norwegians are not direct. You know, Norwegians are more direct, for example, than say the Chinese or the Koreans, right? Relatively. So it's always good to specify what, or to define academically almost what we are saying.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Thank you for that, Chisholm, for clarifying there. And Laura, you know, on this topic, Laura actually said everyone is different, and that is a gift, she put in parentheses. And it's also, the word conflict has different meanings for different people, which is very true. Therefore, she asks, why are we talking about cross-cultural communication? This is needed as we have some similarities within people within our similar culture. So, you know, why are we even talking about cross-cultural communication? Who would like to, from the panel, would one of you like to jump in and answer that? Kevin?
Is that a question, or is she saying that this is why we are talking about?
No, but I'd like to ask
okay.
that question. Why are we even bothering to talk about cross-cultural communication?
Yeah, I have to roll back a little bit to answer that, maybe, and maybe it won't answer it, but let's give it a go. It was back to the talk about the Norwegian directness. You know, now I've lived half my life in Norway, so på noen måter er jeg litt norsk, jeg også, even in my gebroken norsk. I really appreciate that directness, although I would love to bring a little bit more kindness and compassion to it sometimes. So it can be on the receiving end. From as a Brit, half my life, it has sometimes been experienced as brutal, but I appreciate it more than the dallying around the bushes that we do in England, thinking that we're being very sort of, you know, kind to people and things, and we don't say what we mean. So some of the paradox, though, of Norwegian culture and communication is that at the same time as being direct, the Norwegian language, from language researchers, is one of the languages in the world with the most implicit assumptions built into it. And apparently you see it's almost at a level with Japanese culture and Japanese communication. Lots of implicit codes there and things being said and not said, which as an outsider, it's taken me half my life to understand some of those, you know, bump into some of those glass ceilings wherever they are. And it's even shown up in when they've done the language research in the sort of intervals between speech and pauses. You know, the Americans, everything is explicit, so they're talking all the time. There's almost never a sort of gap or anything. In Norwegian, as probably most of us have known, when we go up to the cabin and things, and it's like in comfortable silence, you know, it's all the implicit stuff going on, and then there's some talking going on. You know? If that speaks to the question.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Thank you. Yes, we're basically having this conversation because it's vitally important, right? So Randy said, how can we handle anger towards one culture in the workplace? So she gave an example. Her father is German, and he faced a lot of anger in the 70s and 80s directed towards him just purely for being German, even though he was born in 1945 after the war. So how can we handle anger towards a culture in the workplace? What would be your best advice?
I think when on the receiving end of that anger, of course, it's confusing and you don't understand why. But I think a little bit of emotional intelligence and maybe compassion goes a long way, just in understanding that it's really not about me. And I think that even if we flip this, you know, on the head in some sense, where now imagine that you are a leader of an organization and you pride yourself on being diverse and inclusive, and you want to celebrate pride. But then you have somebody who is Catholic, for example, who believes that it goes against their faith. How do you manage that? How do you say, hey, I want to be inclusive and understanding and tolerant of your beliefs, but at the same time, I also need to be tolerant of this other belief that you may not necessarily agree with. So I really think that there's no blueprint of this is how you handle anger, this is how you handle uncomfortable situation, but it's really about leaning into it and lead with love and compassion and trying to understand from that perspective that this person is not my enemy. We have a difference in opinion. They're not necessarily out to get me. I mean, sometimes people are, but let's assume they're not, right? And lead from that angle to understand, can we talk about this? Can we dig deeper and see if we can find a middle ground? Because at the end of the day, what each person really wants is to be understood. So when you're faced with anger, it could be relevant to say, hey, can we talk about this? You know, where can we find a middle ground here?
Thank you so much, Chisholm. So important. Going to Erica. Erica said that something that William had said earlier made her think of integration initiatives. And she was wondering if the panel could reflect on the responsibility to integrate into a culture or the responsibility to be integrated. You know, where does the responsibility lie? We did touch on this in the workplace, but generally as a societal perspective, any of you like to answer that? William?
I don't think it should be either or, but it should be and. You know, so, and that is why I said that it is the responsibility of both sides. You know, at Oliver Hospital some years back, my wife was there. Then there was a Norwegian nurse who came to call her and said, "Can you come? There's an African woman who doesn't understand Norwegian. Can you come and interpret?" An African woman. My wife, a Ghanaian. Yes, in Africa. So this nurse assumed that there must be an African language which is spoken by all Africans. So she looked at me, and then my wife looked at me, and we knew what was going to happen. And she went, and a woman from a different part of Africa, right? So both sides have to understand that there's nothing like an African language, and not all white people speak English. You know, so if both sides get the relevant information that they need, there will always be good collaboration. Otherwise, nothing will work. And we are not going anywhere. So that it is time for us to try to find better ways of working together.
Definitely.
Otherwise, we will end up, you wake up in the morning, you are upset, you are angry, and hatred is so eaten into you, hoping that one day you wake up and all people who look differently have vanished. But no, nobody is going to stop migration. It's like osmosis. Nobody can stop it.
Oh, that's so true, William, so true. So we're going to stick with you, and we have a question directed to you here. How can organizations make sure to learn something from a new employee, as opposed to not only focusing on teaching the new employee something? So what can they do to ensure that they learn from new employees?
Once again, there is the issue of flexibility, openness, and seeing each individual as a person who has something to contribute. And look, I've been doing this work since 2003. I've learned a lot from different people from different cultures. And because of that, I've come to appreciate the differences in our similarities, and then there's similarities in our differences. And I think we should never stop talking about our differences. There's some dignity in our differences, you know, differences that don't break the laws of a country. We should accommodate it. So that is how, over the years, interacting with different people from different cultures have enriched me a lot. And I try to see people as individuals.
Absolutely, you just use a key word there, William, which is to enrich. And if we just look at nature and take lessons from the laws of nature, the differences actually come together to form and create something new. So, you know, and it's more enriching, and it's, you know, as human beings, if we were to learn from nature that our differences could be our greatest blessings, then our lives would be more full and more enriched. Thank you so much for that. And Christina made a comment where she said, in the farming and food industry, we are learning.
Sorry, Kevin has been trying to say something.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that, Kevin. You're on mute. Maybe that's why I couldn't hear you. You okay?
To use.
Sorry.
I started off with osmosis, and then William said something about there's dignity in difference. And I mean, I had to really stop and let that one sink. Dignity in difference. I think that's missing from a lot of the conversations these days. And for me, it's everything he was speaking to about integration. For me, it's about, we can get into the politics of that, and I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in is, how do I want to live my life in this place at this time with these people? And for me, what's very sobering is to just acknowledge that, you know, at one level, I'm like everybody. At a level of biology and basic needs, I'm like everybody. So I can just acknowledge that, like everybody who's listening now, I want to be happy, content. I don't want to be full of suffering and pain, and I want to be able to develop myself. So at that level, we're all the same. So that's really useful sometimes. At another level, I'm like some people. You know, I'm like other Brits, I'm like other expat Brits, I'm like other people who have been punk, wrestler, all those other things that have been in my past. So that's sort of cultural influence. I'm like a bunch of other people in different ways. And then at the third level, I'm like nobody else. I'm only this Kevin at this moment, you know, with my unique set of filters and cultural assumptions and my unique potential. One of my Buddhist teachers used to say to me, Kevin, sometimes you think you're at the center of the universe, but that's the wrong perspective, brother. You're not the center of the universe, you're the center of your universe. And that was really helpful to me, because as an outsider, I often think that I stand outside of things and that there's no value in that. But she was saying, no, you know, that's, every group needs that unique perspective of yours, even though it's very different to the group norm. So I think those three different levels of acknowledgement are really useful in terms of, you know, how do we assimilate, integrate, how do we live our lives in a way that's really useful for ourselves and others.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you. I was just going to read a comment from Anne Christina. She says, in farming and the food industry, we're learning the consequences of monoculture and the need for biodiversity, how everything plays a role, but not always together at the same time, which is very much the same for human beings. As a society, we have to be and become more human, kind, in capital letters. So scrolling down to the next questions, few coming in here. Bruce says, one of the things I have done is to organize a session for all the people who join the organization. This was in reference to the new team member. And recently, for example, within the past 6 months, he's done that. So he's organized a session for all the people who have joined the organization, and he's done this within the last 6 months. The session focuses on the diversity and complementarity of skills, superpowers of those present, and it's about them forming a new community together across the organization. That's a great tip. Thank you so much, Bruce. That's really cool. Right, this screen is scrolling quite quickly.
I'm just seeing comments from Nikki here. Did you get Easy's question?
No, do you want to read it out?
I can, let me get to it. So it says, within this context, do you have any tips for helping new colleagues feel included, especially given the current online setting? You don't end up having the usual kitchen coffee chats where you would usually have more of the informal conversation and get to know each other's cultures. And I think Nikki wanted to hear a response to this. Yeah. Yeah, Kevin, go, and then I can jump in.
Yeah, I was with one group the other week, and they were saying that they had a lot of fun by not just with the new people, but with people from different backgrounds. That everybody, because we're all stuck in one place at the moment, there's very little travel going on. They did virtual travel for one another. So William might take me off on a trip to Ghana, and I might take him off on a trip to the East End of London or whatever, so that you sort of introduce yourself beyond my little narrow working role as a fully fledged person with all those assumptions and the richness of my multicultural background and things, by taking the others on a virtual trip. So you do an insider travel and bring your colleagues along with you. You can do that on Zoom, and it's very easy. You can even do it as a sort of virtual travel where you actually take them there these days through all the different cameras that are around the world. That seemed like they'd had a lot of success with that and created a sort of collective glue for the group, that kept them together and took them places which, at the coffee machine, they might not do that unless they actually traveled away together.
Wow.
If I could add to that, I just want to quickly read Emma's answer, which I think is also quite good to this, I think, as a response to this question. She says, I love Easy's question too. I'm a recruiter, HR person by trade, and some of the things I've tried / being on the receiving end of have been things like being curious, asking questions about the person, taking an extra minute or two in the meeting to explain some background to a workplace issue, trying to break down the language, e.g. spelling out the acronym and so on. I think this is a fantastic way. If I could add to that, just in saying how I try to work with this with my team, and also how my team works with this with me, is I think also just comes down to not making a lot of assumptions as to when you're trying to be inclusive, when you make a joke, but then it doesn't really transfer, but I think in terms of including people virtually, of course, that is difficult. And I think it requires that extra touch where if you cannot go somewhere together or share a meal and you have that time to really connect, then I think it's really important to pick up the phone or say, hey, let's just have a, video call and get to know each other. And just, I think as a leader in this case, or the person welcoming the new person into a group, I think it's your responsibility to lead with, that openness and, also maybe even vulnerability. You could say something like, I really want to get to know you, and I know it's difficult virtually, but can we start here? Where can we build from? What are your interests? Ask other things not related to work to make people feel included. Maybe share a resource, invite them to like a poker thing you play online, or a paint and sip thing coming up that you do with your friends. So I think it's in the little, sometimes maybe even like the things you don't necessarily consider as big things. It's always the little things that make the most impact. It's taking that extra time. If I think about how I do this with my team, is, I feel like I know them well enough. So if you're having a rough day, maybe I can see it. After the meeting, I could ask, during the meeting, I can ask, hey, Nikki, are you having a good day? And she's like, yeah, I am. And I will call afterwards and say, hey, let's talk. Are you having a good day? And just dig deep a little bit. So I think it's just in being kind, like Kevin said, and just taking that extra time to say, hey, Did you sleep well today, or did you wake up on the wrong side of the bed?
Thanks, Chisholm. Thank you. And William, we'll come to you.
Yes, thank you. I want to add to what Chisholm just said. You know, if you're a leader, definitely you have more responsibilities, right? And then sometimes we do observe things. Let's say you go to a staff meeting and then a new staff member who is new, a minority, would say something. The leader wouldn't say anything. And then the majority, a member from the majority, will say almost the same thing. And the leader will sing praises. It affects people, you know? So we see things, we hear things. The way you treat people differently can make a worker go back home and will be wondering, what did I do wrong? You know, of course, I mean, we are not in a paradise. There will always be a few individuals who will make our hair stand up, but we should try to focus on the majority who smile with us and make us feel welcome, because not all of us will be nice, and that is a fact. We can never change that. Yeah.
So true.
Thank you. I'm done with that.
So true. Sure. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, two very quick practices. If you're a manager to employee, or whether it's colleague to colleague, don't do a business lunch to really get to know each other and keep the glue there. Virtual times, then do a non-business lunch. Where I work, my team, we do no business lunches. All our lunches are no business lunches. We have to talk about our families, whatever it is. We can't talk about the business. You know? And a group thing, a fun thing to do is get everyone in the group to write up something which you know, none of my colleagues know about me. Put it all in a hat and then pull them out and have a quiz. You know. So, you know, is it Chisholm, this one who's been on stage with the Rolling Stones, or is that William? Or maybe it's Hyacinth, you know? Do that thing. That really sort of, you know, creates a buzz of us being bigger than our prescribed roles.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, in my former role, my first day that I started, the whole team took the morning off, and they welcomed me with flowers, with chocolates, with a handwritten card just to say, we've been so looking forward to you starting with us. And one of the bosses, one of the founders of the company, cooked lunch for the whole team in honor of me joining the team. And we sat and we had a, you know, group lunch, and we played games, and they literally spent 3 hours making me feel so loved and so welcomed. What they didn't know was it was 12 months to the day that I lost my former husband and father of my child. They didn't actually know that. So I was so broken inside and so emotional, but they made me feel so loved. So the little things mean a big thing to a lot of people. And on that note, we have come to the end of this conversation. Oh, okay. End it with tears. We start with dancing and we end with tears. Tears of
It's
joy.
all good.
Tears of joy. So thank you everybody for your comments, for your suggestions, for your questions. Thank you to our beautiful panelists for your wisdom that you've shared. Thank you everybody. This has truly been a phenomenal event. Led me to tears. God. And I look forward to the next event, and I believe one of the team, Nikki or Susanna, is going to add the details in the chat here. We will follow up with a follow-up email to share resources, to share information that was shared in here. But I really just want to say thank you. You guys make all of this work worthwhile. You coming back month after month, really, really adds so much value. And as you can see, the speakers just get better and better and better and better with what they're adding and delivering. So thank you. So we have some shoulder shaking to end the session with today. Shoulder shaking. And if everybody could
promised
just...
us you were going to break into song, Hyacinth. Come on, lead us in something.
Yeah, break into song. So because we've had our guys here today, we can go, let's hear it for the boys. Woo! Let's give the boys...
And let's hear it for the girls.
Everybody
Let's
wants to
hear it for the
dance.
ladies,
Yay!
William. Let's hear it for the ladies. Yeah.
Let's hear it for the ladies.
And let's hear it for the people who don't define themselves as either.
And so you don't even have to be able to sing. You just...
Thank you
let
so
it out.
much.
You're welcome. Thank you, William. Thank you, everybody. And, you know, thank you. We look forward to seeing you again at the next session. You guys rock. We love